Now, if you were to ask the average galactic citizen what they considered the most terrifying force in the universe, you'd get the usual suspects: black holes, entropy, that one restaurant on Kepler 442b that serves expired quantum soup. What you wouldn't expect to hear is orphaned children. But then again, most galactic citizens lack imagination and a proper understanding of bureaucratic incompetence on a cosmic scale. The Galactic Custody Bureau existed in that special realm of administrative hell where good intentions went to die slow, paper-cut deaths. Housed in a building that defied several laws of physics and at least 3 architectural guidelines, it was staffed by beings who had either volunteered for the job or lost spectacularly bad bets. Bureau Chief Moxian sat at their desk, surrounded by towers of holographic paperwork that occasionally flickered with existential dread, wondering how their career in interstellar child welfare had devolved into what could generously be called controlled chaos, and more accurately described as a disaster waiting for the right moment to become legendary. The current crisis began, as most galactic catastrophes do, with someone pressing the wrong button. In this case, it was intern Blix, a well-meaning Centaurian whose understanding of interdimensional portal maintenance could charitably be described as lacking as enthusiastic but misguided. One misaligned quantum flux capacitor later, and 500 of the galaxy's most dangerous apex predator cubs found themselves orphaned simultaneously when their respective parents' dimensional meeting was unceremoniously scattered across 17 different realities. "So let me understand this correctly," Moxian said, their voice carrying the particular exhaustion that comes from explaining the same disaster for the 15th time that day. "We have cubs from the Void Stalkers, the ones who can phase through dimensions and whose adults casually hunt star-devouring entities for sport. We have offspring from the crystalline hegemony, whose idea of a bedtime story involves recalculating universal constants. We have babies from the quantum swarm, who exist in multiple probability states and can accidentally rewrite local physics when they sneeze." "That's correct, Chief," replied their assistant, a remarkably calm individual who had either achieved enlightenment or suffered a complete nervous breakdown so thoroughly that they'd come out the other side. "Plus the usual suspects: Shell-bearer dynasty cubs who can tank supernovas, Plasma Federation younglings who are literally made of weaponized energy, and that particularly concerning Ursine collective infant, who keeps trying to establish dominance by challenging our filing cabinets to single combat." Moxian rubbed their temples, a gesture that had become so frequent it was wearing grooves in their skull. "And the parents? Scattered across dimensions. Could take anywhere from 6 months to 6 millennia to retrieve them, assuming they don't accidentally conquer whatever realities they've ended up in first. Wonderful." Moxian stared at the mountain of emergency adoption applications that had materialized on their desk like some kind of bureaucratic avalanche. Each one represented a different galactic empire, federation, or collective demanding that their precious death machine offspring be placed in suitable care immediately, or they would consider it an act of war. Because nothing said rational diplomatic response like threatening interstellar conflict over babysitting arrangements. "There is one application that seems promising," the assistant offered, sliding a particular file across the desk with the careful precision of someone handling unstable explosives. Meanwhile, on a small blue planet, in an unremarkable spiral arm of the galaxy, Owen sat in his cramped studio apartment, staring at his computer screen with the particular blend of optimism and desperation that characterized most of his life decisions. A mid-level xenobiologist at the local university, he spent his days cataloging the mating habits of alien microorganisms, and his evenings wondering why he'd chosen a career that involved so much paperwork and so little actual contact with interesting life forms. "Just one cat," he muttered to himself, clicking through the adoption website with practiced determination. "One normal, Earth-standard cat who won't judge my life choices or require explanations about why I eat cereal for dinner 3 nights a week." The form was straightforward enough. Name, address, living situation, experience with pets. Owen filled it out with the careful attention of someone who had been rejected by 3 different animal shelters for having inadequate space for proper pet enrichment, a phrase that still stung because it was technically accurate. His studio apartment was roughly the size of a generous closet, but it had good lighting and came pre-furnished with optimism. He clicked submit and settled back to wait, unaware that his application had just been intercepted by a routing algorithm that had developed what could generously be called creative interpretation skills and a tendency to forward Earth-based paperwork to the most inappropriate galactic departments possible. In this case, Owen's humble request for one small domestic animal companion had just been processed as Universal Adoption Application, Apex, Predator Specialist Seeking Challenge Assignment. Back at the Galactic Custody Bureau, Moxian stared at Owen's application with the expression of someone who had just discovered water in the desert, if that water might also potentially solve 17 different diplomatic crises. He lists his species as human, their assistant noted, consulting a rapidly updating database. Says here they're a Class 7 adaptive intelligence with notable pack bonding tendencies and an unusual affinity for caring for other species' offspring. Pack bonding. Moxian's interest was piqued. Pack bonding was exactly the kind of psychological profile they needed for someone who would have to parent 500 different species simultaneously without having a complete mental breakdown. Yes, and according to this cultural analysis, humans have a documented history of domesticating literally anything that stands still long enough. They've successfully bonded with creatures ranging from microscopic to megafaunal, often against the better judgment of both species involved. Moxian leaned back in their chair, which creaked ominously because even furniture suffered under the weight of bureaucratic stress. What about his living situation? Lists it as compact but efficient urban dwelling with modern amenities. The translation algorithm suggests this indicates a highly sophisticated living space designed for maximum resource utilization. What the translation algorithm had actually encountered was Owen's optimistic description of an apartment where the bed doubled as the couch, the kitchen table served as his desk, and modern amenities meant the Wi-Fi worked most of the time, and the heater only made terrifying noises on weekends. But translation algorithms, like bureaucrats, occasionally suffered from chronic optimism disorder, experience with challenging behavioral situations, extensive professional background in xenobiological research with emphasis on adaptation and species integration. The assistant paused, scrolling through more data. Also mentions experience with difficult roommates, which the cultural analysis suggests refers to some form of advanced conflict resolution training. Owen's experience with difficult roommates actually consisted of 3 months living with a guy who collected vintage mannequins and insisted on having philosophical discussions with them at 3 a.m. But the Galactic Translation Matrix was interpreting this as evidence of advanced psychological resilience and multicultural communication skills. This is either going to be the best decision I've made all century, or the worst, Moxian declared, reaching for their approval stamp. But given that our alternatives are explaining to 500 different galactic powers why we can't find suitable care for their offspring, I'm willing to take the risk. The stamp came down with a satisfying thunk that seemed to echo across dimensional barriers. Somewhere in the cosmic bureaucracy, forms were filed, transport orders were issued, and diplomatic pouches were sealed with wax that smelled faintly of inevitability. Owen, blissfully unaware that his quiet Tuesday evening was about to become significantly more complicated, was making himself a grilled cheese sandwich and wondering if he should buy plants to make his apartment look more responsible to potential pet adoption agencies. He'd just settled down with his sandwich and a book about the social structures of fungal networks when his doorbell rang. This was unusual for several reasons, the primary one being that his doorbell had been broken for 6 months and mainly produced a sound like a dying electronic sheep. The fact that it was now chiming with crystalline perfection was the first sign that his evening was about to take an unexpected turn into the realm of the cosmically absurd. Owen opened the door to find three beings who looked like they'd stepped out of a particularly ambitious science fiction convention. If science fiction conventions included actual aliens with credentials and an alarming amount of clipboard-based authority. "Owen of Earth?" inquired the tallest one, consulting what appeared to be a tablet made of crystallized light. "We are here to conduct your pre-placement evaluation for Universal Adoption Application 7.2847 times 10 to the 15th power. My what now?" Owen managed, grilled cheese sandwich still in hand like some kind of terrestrial peace offering. "Your application for the care and custody of 500 high-priority orphaned cubs from various apex predator species," explained the second evaluator, a being whose skin seemed to shift through several spectrums of light simultaneously. "We understand you have prepared an advanced care facility for their immediate placement." Owen looked behind him at his studio apartment, where his unmade bed was clearly visible from the front door, and his collection of takeout containers had achieved what could charitably be called structural integrity on the kitchen counter. "I think there's been a mistake," he said slowly, but the evaluators were already pushing past him with the professional determination of beings who had 17 more inspections to complete before their shift ended. "Impressive," noted the third evaluator, a creature that looked like someone had given geometric theorems physical form and a clipboard. "The compact design maximizes efficiency while maintaining optimal sight lines for monitoring multiple charges simultaneously." Owen watched in growing bewilderment as they began examining his apartment with the intensity of archaeologists discovering a new pyramid. His microwave was declared a molecular reconstruction and nutritional optimization device. His vacuum cleaner became an atmospheric purification and debris management system. His shower was noted as a full-body hygiene and temperature regulation facility with integrated water recycling capabilities. "And this," said the light-spectrum being, opening his refrigerator with reverent care, "is clearly a specimen preservation and nutritional resource management center with multiple climate zones." Owen stared at his refrigerator, which contained 3 takeout containers of questionable age, half a bag of baby carrots that had achieved wrinkled enlightenment, and a carton of milk that was probably still good if you didn't think about it too hard. "The living space demonstrates remarkable adaptability," the tall one continued, making notes on their light tablet. "Single-room design allows for constant supervision while the elevated sleeping platform provides strategic oversight positioning." His bed. They were talking about his bed like it was some kind of tactical command center. "I really think you've got the wrong person." Owen tried again, but the geometric evaluator was already sealing something that looked like an official document with what appeared to be a small, contained aurora. "Evaluation complete," they announced. "Candidate demonstrates optimal facility design, resource management capabilities, and psychological profile suitable for multi-species parental assignment. Recommendation: full approval with expedited placement scheduling." Expedited what? But they were already filing out of his apartment with the efficient purposefulness of beings who had just completed one more impossible task in a day full of them. The tall one paused at the door, turning back with what might have been a smile if their species had evolved facial expressions recognizable to human anatomy. "Congratulations, Owen of Earth. Transport vessels will begin arriving within the next standard rotation. We recommend preparing sufficient nutritional resources and sleeping areas. 500 growing cubs have substantial appetites and energy levels." The door closed behind them with a soft click, leaving Owen standing in his studio apartment holding a grilled cheese sandwich and the growing realization that he had somehow accidentally applied to become the universe's most overwhelmed babysitter. Outside, the first transport ships were already beginning their descent toward Earth, their holds filled with 500 of the galaxy's most adorable apocalypses, all of whom had somehow decided that a confused xenobiologist with a broken doorbell and a refrigerator full of questionable leftovers was exactly what they needed in a parent. Owen took a bite of his grilled cheese sandwich, stared at his apartment with new eyes, and wondered if his insurance covered interdimensional incidents. Probably not, but then again, his Tuesday evenings had been getting pretty boring lately. The morning sun had barely crested the horizon when the first transport vessel materialized above Owen's neighborhood with all the subtlety of a cosmic event, having a particularly dramatic breakdown. Mrs. Abigail, who had been tending her prize-winning petunias with the dedication of someone who considered gardening a competitive sport, looked up to see what appeared to be a crystalline cathedral mixed with a spaceship having an identity crisis, hovering approximately 30 feet above her bird bath. "Well," she said to her petunias, because talking to plants was perfectly normal behavior, while talking to hovering alien architecture was clearly the domain of people who needed stronger medication. "That's new." Owen, meanwhile, had spent the night oscillating between convincing himself he'd hallucinated the entire previous evening and frantically Googling how to child-proof apartment for interdimensional beings with predictably unhelpful results. He was halfway through his second pot of coffee and deep into a Wikipedia spiral about galactic adoption laws, which, surprisingly, was a real article, though he suspected it had been written by someone with a very active imagination or access to information that should probably be classified, when his ceiling began to hum. The humming was followed by a gentle chiming sound, which was followed by his entire apartment being bathed in what could best be described as friendly golden light that suggested everything was going to be fine, and please don't panic about the imminent arrival of cosmic forces beyond your comprehension. A voice emanated from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in perfectly accented English that somehow conveyed both infinite patience and barely controlled exasperation. "Greetings, Owen of Earth. We are the Crystalline Hegemony Transport Collective Unit 7, here to deliver your assigned offspring. Please prepare your receiving area for dimensional manifestation." "My what area for what now?" Owen called back, looking around his studio apartment and wondering what exactly constituted a receiving area. In this context, his kitchen table, the space between his bed and the wall where he usually did yoga videos twice a month when motivation struck. "Receiving area prepared and optimized," the voice announced, apparently taking his silence as confirmation rather than bewildered panic. "Initiating transfer protocol." The air in the center of Owen's apartment began to shimmer like heat waves, except instead of heat, it radiated what felt suspiciously like anticipation mixed with the cosmic equivalent of new car smell. The shimmer coalesced into a perfect sphere of light, which then proceeded to unfold itself into what looked like a delivery portal operated by beings who had clearly never heard the phrase work-life balance. Through the portal stepped a creature that appeared to be part crystalline mantis, part geometric theorem, and part customer service representative who had achieved enlightenment through the power of extreme professionalism. It carried what looked like a carrier designed by someone who thought regular pet carriers were insufficiently majestic and needed more architectural ambition. "Delivery manifest for Owen of Earth," the being announced, producing a clipboard that seemed to exist in several dimensions simultaneously. "One crystalline hegemony offspring. Designation Fluffington Unit 7. Age classification. Junior geometric consciousness. Special requirements. Intellectual stimulation through quantum mathematics, mineral supplementation, and regular recalibration of local physics constants." Owen stared at the carrier, which was humming softly and occasionally producing small geometric shapes that drifted around it like mathematical butterflies. Inside, visible through what appeared to be crystallized space-time, was what looked like a kitten made of living crystal, if kittens were typically capable of casually rewriting the laws of physics and viewing reality as more of a suggestion than a hard rule. "There's been a mistake," Owen began, but Fluffington Unit 7 chose that moment to notice him through the carrier walls. The small crystal kitten pressed what might have been a face against the transparent barrier and made a sound that was somehow simultaneously a purr, a mathematical equation, and a request for attention that transcended species boundaries. The emergency session of the United Nations Security Council convened at precisely 3:47 a.m., which was either the perfect time for discussing cosmic-level childcare disasters or the absolute worst, depending on whether you'd had your coffee and how comfortable you were with the concept of reality becoming increasingly negotiable. Ambassador Iris stood at the head of the table, her usually immaculate diplomatic composure showing hairline cracks that suggested she'd been briefed on the situation by people who were either remarkably creative or had suffered collective nervous breakdowns. Around the table, representatives from every major nation stared at satellite feeds that showed Owen's neighborhood had spontaneously developed what could charitably be called unusual architectural features, and more accurately described as violations of several fundamental laws of physics. "Ladies and gentlemen," Iris began, her voice carrying the particular strain that came from explaining impossible situations to people who were paid to deal with merely improbable ones. "We have a situation." The British representative, a man whose stiff upper lip had survived 2 decades of international diplomacy, raised his hand with the careful precision of someone who suspected he was about to ask a very stupid question. "Ambassador, are we to understand that a single civilian is currently in possession of what our military advisors are describing as 500 weapons of mass destruction disguised as adorable pets?" "That is one way to phrase it, yes." Colonel Wesley, who had been summoned from his morning jog and still looked like he was processing the transition from peaceful Tuesday morning to potential interstellar incident, consulted his hastily prepared briefing materials with the expression of a man discovering that his job description had just expanded to include cosmic babysitting logistics. "The preliminary assessment," he said, clearing his throat in a way that suggested even his vocal cords were skeptical of what he was about to say, "indicates that the combined destructive potential of these offspring exceeds that of our entire nuclear arsenal by approximately 7 orders of magnitude." On a quiet day, the French representative, who had cultivated an impressive ability to remain unflappable in the face of international crises, slowly removed her glasses and cleaned them with the methodical precision of someone buying time to process information that challenged her understanding of causality. "And they are currently residing in a studio apartment in suburban Michigan." "Studio apartment with recently upgraded interdimensional properties," Colonel Wesley corrected, because accuracy was important even when discussing impossible situations. "Our physicists are calling it spatially non-Euclidean, but surprisingly cozy." Meanwhile, 3 blocks away from the UN emergency session, Agent Melody sat in an unmarked van surrounded by monitoring equipment that was recording readings so unprecedented that the instruments occasionally stopped displaying numbers and started showing what appeared to be small, confused question marks. "Status report," her radio crackled with the voice of someone who was probably sitting in a bunker somewhere, asking questions they hoped would have reasonable answers. "Subject Owen appears to be adapting," Melody reported, watching through high-powered surveillance equipment as Owen attempted to serve breakfast to what looked like a small menagerie of cosmic horrors having a tea party. "He's established what appears to be a feeding schedule and has introduced concepts that our xenopsychology consultants are calling revolutionary advances in interspecies child care." Through her binoculars, she watched Owen crouch down to explain something to Chompers, the void stalker cub that looked like a demonic hamster and had the documented ability to phase through dimensions when excited. The cub was sitting perfectly still, listening with what appeared to be rapt attention as Owen gestured toward a small bowl of what the analysis team had identified as standard Earth-grade pet kibble, nutritionally enhanced through unknown quantum processes. "He's teaching them table manners," Melody continued, her voice carrying the particular bewilderment of someone watching the impossible become routine. "The crystalline hegemony offspring just calculated 17 new geometric theorems while learning to wait its turn for food. The quantum swarm entity has collapsed into a single probability state that appears to be politely hungry." Back at the UN, Ambassador Iris was fielding increasingly surreal questions from world leaders who were trying to process the concept that their planet had accidentally become the galaxy's most important daycare center. "What about evacuation protocols?" asked the German representative. "Our scientists inform me that attempting to relocate the cubs could result in what they're diplomatically calling an unfortunate cascade of unintended consequences," Iris replied. "The technical term appears to be reality Hiccup. Reality hiccup. Think of it as the universe's equivalent of dropping your phone, except instead of a cracked screen, you get several laws of physics filing for early retirement. Inspector Havel arrived on Earth with the kind of fanfare typically reserved for cosmic events or really spectacular natural disasters. Her ship materialized in Owen's backyard with a sound like reality clearing its throat, followed by what appered to be a small parade of bureaucratic entities who had collectively decided that today was an excellent day to ensure the universe's most dangerous children were being properly supervised. Owen, who had spent the morning explaining to Bubbles why rearranging local gravity during breakfast was not helpful behavior, looked up from his increasingly non-Euclidean kitchen table to see a being who appeared to have been designed by committee, if that committee consisted of geometric principles, professional disappointment, and the concept of inevitable paperwork. Owen of Earth, Inspector Havel announced, consulting a clipboard that existed in several dimensions simultaneously and occasionally flickered with what looked like cosmic disapproval. I am here to conduct your mandatory universal parent evaluation. Please assemble your charges for inspection. My charges are having their afternoon quiet time, Owen replied, gesturing toward his living room where 500 of the galaxy's most dangerous offspring were engaged in what could generously be called restful activities, and more accurately described as temporarily contained chaos. Fluffington Unit 7 was calculating new geometric theorems while purring. Chompers was phasing through dimensions in its sleep, and Patches was establishing dominance over a throw pillow through the ancient Ursine collective tradition of aggressive cuddling. Inspector Havel made a note on her interdimensional clipboard with the kind of precision that suggested she had strong opinions about proper documentation procedures. Quiet time is not a recognized galactic child-rearing protocol. Please demonstrate your training methodologies. Owen looked around his apartment, which had undergone what his neighbors politely called architectural evolution, and what physicists were calling a fascinating case study in applied spatial impossibility. The space now somehow contained areas that were larger on the inside than the outside, rooms that existed only when needed, and a bathroom that had achieved temporal stability through what appeared to be collective willpower and strategic ignorance of conventional physics. Well, Owen said, because he'd learned that confidence was key when dealing with galactic bureaucracy. Let's start with basic commands. Watch this. He turned toward the assembled cubs and said, in the tone he'd perfected for addressing particularly attentive undergraduate students, "Sit." The response was immediate and, from a cosmic perspective, terrifying. 500 cubs sat with such perfect synchronization that local time briefly paused to appreciate the mathematical precision of their positioning. Fluffington Unit 7 sat so geometrically perfect that it accidentally created a small pocket of crystallized space-time. Chompers sat so still that it momentarily existed in all dimensions simultaneously. Bubbles collapsed into a probability state of perfectly seated that caused gravity to organize itself into neat, orderly lines. Inspector Havel's clipboard began smoking slightly, which Owen had learned was usually a sign that reality was having minor technical difficulties. Excellent form, she noted, though her voice carried the particular strain of someone whose professional skepticism was wrestling with empirical evidence. Demonstrate additional behavioral conditioning. Stay, Owen said, and 500 cosmic horrors froze in place with such absolute obedience that the local space-time continuum briefly considered filing a formal complaint about the sudden lack of entropy in the immediate area. Fetch, Owen continued, tossing a tennis ball toward the kitchen. What happened next was a masterclass in why training cosmic entities required very specific safety protocols. Wisp, the energy-based cub from the Plasma Federation, retrieved the ball by briefly folding space-time, bringing the kitchen to the ball rather than the other way around. Spike, demonstrating impressive problem-solving skills, retrieved 17 different tennis balls from various parallel dimensions, where Owen had apparently thrown the same ball under slightly different circumstances. Inspector Havel's clipboard was now actively glitching. displaying readings that fluctuated between impossible and mathematically uncomfortable. "This is highly irregular," she said, though her tone suggested she was beginning to suspect that irregular might be the new baseline for this particular assignment. "Standard galactic parenting protocols do not account for this level of compliance." "Human parenting techniques," Owen explained, scratching behind Patch's ears while she purred with enough resonance to make his coffee mug harmonize, "tend to emphasize positive reinforcement and consistent boundaries rather than species-specific dominance hierarchies." Positive reinforcement? Inspector Havel consulted her clipboard as if hoping it might contain a translation for this alien concept. Praise, treats, affection when they demonstrate good behavior, gentle correction when they don't. The basic idea is that they want to make me proud of them, so they try to be good. The inspector stared at him for a long moment, then at the cubs, who were all watching this conversation with the kind of focused attention usually reserved for prey animals assessing potential threats. Except in this case, the prey was bureaucratic skepticism, and it was rapidly losing ground to empirical evidence. "Make you proud," she repeated, as if testing the words for hidden meanings or dangerous implications. "Sure, they're good kids. They just needed someone to believe in them." Somewhere in the cosmic bureaucracy, several long-standing theories about child-rearing collapsed under the weight of actual results, while Inspector Havel's clipboard quietly began generating new forms labeled Universal Parenting Protocol, Human Variant, Emergency Implementation Guidelines,